Imagine getting your hands on a complex scientific model, not just, reading about it, but actually running it, tweaking things,
Right.
seeing it work.
Yeah, exactly. And that's pretty much what our sources let us do today. We've got this really interesting stack of documents here.
Mostly code, right? And notes.
Mostly code, yeah, and the notes that go with it. It all lays out a simulation and validation framework for something called the fractal QFT temporal optimization model.
Fractal QFT temporal optimization. Okay, sounds pretty heavy.
It does, yeah. So our mission really for this deep dive is to unpack all this material. We want to figure out what this framework is actually designed to do for someone using it.
Right.
Pull out the key bits from the code, the notes, and, extract the important insights for you, the listener.
And these sources, they're quite a mix, aren't they? It's not just dry code.
Not at all. You've got the math functions turned into code, sure,
Yeah.
but also the simulation parameters you can play with, metrics to check if things are running okay.
And even some pretty unique commentary and philosophical stuff from the creator woven into the notes. It feels like more than just an algorithm.
Definitely. It gives you the mechanics, but also a real sense of the thinking behind the mechanics.
Okay, so let's dive in. Fundamentally, what is this framework trying to do? What's its main job, according to these sources?
Well, at its heart, it's built to simulate and, I guess, explore what the creator calls the temporal optimization of a system. And that system is described by their fractal QFT model.
Okay, temporal optimization.
Think of it like simulating how this specific theoretical system changes, evolves over time, and maybe whether it reaches or holds on to some kind of optimal
But
state.
and how does that look in practice within this framework? What's the main thing it's actually simulating or tracking?
The absolute core focus is tracking the evolution of a wave function over time. There's the central function, evolve wave function, that calculates how this wave function changes from one time step to the next. And it seems really geared towards handling points of abrupt change, things the notes call temporal discontinuities.
Ah, and that connects to that delta Z parameter we saw.
Exactly. That delta Z seems critical in the math that governs this evolution, especially around those discontinuities.
Got it. Okay, let's get into the engine room then. The core math, the algorithms in the code. What are the key pieces doing the work here?
Right. So if we look at the calculation flow,
Yeah.
one really key piece is calculate CQ log.
Calculate CQ log. What goes into that?
It takes info about the initial state there's a retained mentioned, which the notes link to the starting size, the magnitude of the wave function.
Okay, initial magnitude.
Yeah, CQ log. That plus the temporal step size, deltonits or delta Z, and a couple of coefficients, KDCP and base. And out comes this value, CQ log.
And the notes actually label CQ log as an optimization factor. What does that suggest?
Well, that label makes it pretty clear it's meant to quantify something central to the model's idea of temporal optimization, doesn't it? The fact that it's logarithmic,
Hmm.
it suggests that changes in the starting conditions, or maybe the size of that discontinuity, delta Z, have this kind of scaled, maybe nonlinear impact on optimization. It's presented as a key number for judging how optimized things are.
Okay, so CQ log is one optimization factor. Then there's calculate gamma opt. What's that one about?
Right, calculate gamma opt. This one takes the CQ log value we just talked about and that coefficient KDCP, and it calculates gamma opt.
Which the notes also call an optimization factor.
Yes, another one. But the formula is totally different. It's an inverse exponential.
Ah.
XP few, CQ log TDCP.
Huh. So as CQ log goes up, gamma opt goes down exponentially.
Exactly. They seem like inversely related ways of measuring optimization. Maybe they capture different aspects of it, different perspectives on the system's state.
Interesting. Two factors behaving differently. Okay, what about calculate temporal transmission?
So this function uses the time step size, deltas, another coefficient, KTV. The notes call it a temporal velocity coefficient, and that gamma opt value we discussed,
And it calculates T temporal.
which the notes label temporal transmission. This seems to be about how well maybe information or influence gets passed along or conserved across a time step, especially one with a discontinuity.
So a higher T temporal might mean better flow through time, more stability.
Something like that, a more efficient or stable transmission, yeah. And all of these calculations, they feed into the main event, the evolve wave function.
Precisely. Evolve wave function is where the rubber meets the road for the wave function's journey.
Right.
It takes the current state, the real and imaginary parts of the wave function, those spatial parameters, Z1 and Z2. Remember, Z2 is just Z1 plus delta Z.
Got it.
The coefficients KTV and TOMM, the step size deltas, and the current time T. And it uses the model's rules to figure out the wave function state at the next point in time.
I noticed some terms in the code there, like an amplitude factor based on Z2, Z1,
Hmm.
and a decay term involving KTV and TOMM. What do those tell us? Good catch. That amplitude factor, math.sqrt Z2Z1, suggests the overall size or intensity of the wave function might change depending on those spatial settings or the delta Z discontinuity.
Okay.
And the decay term, math.expo-ktv apps deltas to TOMM, well, that implies there's some kind of loss or damping built in. It gets stronger with bigger time steps or a higher KTV.
And TOMEM. The notes called that a memory or decay time constant.
Right, so that TOMM influences how quickly that decay happens. It suggests the system might sort of forget or lose coherence over time, especially over larger steps.
So the whole simulation framework just strings these calculations together step after step for a set amount of time.
That's basically it. It sets up a loop that runs for however many t steps the user specifies.
And the sources are really clear about the simulation parameters that you, the user, get to control.
Yes, this is the interactive part. You can set the starting wave function, pod size 0 real, size 0 am. You control those spatial parameters Z1 and the key delta Z.
Which also sets Z2.
Right. Then you set KTV, that temporal velocity coefficient, TOMM, the memory constant, KDCP for CQ log, the base for the logarithm, and of course, how many time steps, t-steps to run.
And the notes say adjusting these lets you explore different optimization regimes. So what can you actually find out by tweaking these knobs?
Well, you can see directly how different starting points or different internal physics represented by those coefficients change the wave function's path. You see how the optimization factors, CQ log and gamma opt, react. You can check if the system stays stable, if it conserves energy, things like that. Does making delta Z bigger cause more decay? How does changing TOMM affect the coherence? These parameters are your tools to probe the model.
Okay, so you run a simulation. What kind of data does it actually spit out?
It gives you time series data. So for each time step, you get the real part of the wave function, the imaginary part, its overall magnitude, apps psi, plus the calculated t-temporal, gamma opt, and CQ log. And it also tracks something called quenching. Sounds like it might relate to that decay or loss we talk about.
And just getting raw data isn't always enough. The framework includes validation metrics, which sounds crucial. How do you know if a simulation run is, well, good or meaningful?
Yeah, this is super important. The sources lay out several checks. One is energy conservation. It basically compares the final wave function magnitude to the starting magnitude.
The ratio final mag, initial mag?
Exactly. And the code checks if that ratio is close to 1. Specifically, the threshold seems to be set at greater than 0.9.
Suggesting the model expects energy to be nearly conserved in a valid run.
Seems like it. If the magnitude drops way off, it might mean the simulation isn't capturing what it's supposed to, or maybe it's just computationally unstable under those parameters.
Makes sense. What else?
There's temporal coherence. The notes call it a stability measure based on magnitude variance.
How does that work?
It's calculated as one magnitude variance, where the variance measures how much the magnitude jumps around between successive steps. So perfect smoothness, 0 variance, would give a coherence of 1.
And the threshold?
The code checks if coherence is greater than 0.8, so it wants the magnitude to evolve fairly smoothly over time. Low coherence might mean instability, maybe chaotic behavior.
Okay. Any other checks?
Yep. CQ log validity. This seems like a basic check that CQ log is actually a meaningful number, not like log of 0 or something. It checks if it's greater than 0.1.
A sanity check.
Pretty much. Then there's transmission efficiency, which is just the average t-temporal over the whole simulation.
Average U transmission.
Right. And it checks if that average is above 0.1, suggesting that for a simulation to be considered valid or optimized, there needs to be some baseline level of efficient transmission across time steps on average.
And it also reports the max quenching and final gamma opt.
Yeah, those values are provided as outputs too, likely for analysis. And the framework even hints at having automatic status flags based on these thresholds.
So you get quick visual feedback, green light, red light, on whether a run met these validation criteria.
Seems like it. Which would be incredibly handy when you're tweaking those parameters and running lots of simulations.
Absolutely. And speaking of visual feedback, the framework offers visualization and exploration capabilities. This must be where it really comes alive.
Totally. It's not just numbers, you get to see the results. It offers multiple visualization modes.
Like what?
You can plot the wave function itself, its magnitude over time, and its real and imaginary parts separately.
Standard stuff, but essential.
For sure. Then there's a phase space view. that plots the real part versus the imaginary part, showing the wave function's trajectory in the complex plane.
Ah, that can reveal cool patterns, right? Like
Yep.
cycles or attractors.
Exactly. Or even chaotic behavior. There's also a dedicated transmission view just for plotting T-temporal over time.
So you could see if it dips during discontinuities, maybe.
Precisely. And finally, an optimization view that brings together CQ-log, gamma-opt, and those validation metrics onto one dashboard. Lets you track the key optimization factors visually.
The notes say this provides immediate visual feedback for parameter sensitivity analysis. Change a parameter, run it, see the plots change instantly.
Yeah, it makes the connection really clear. The notes even frame these as experimental validation capabilities, letting you monitor conservation, stability, optimization efficiency, and really explore that parameter space interactively. It's designed like a research tool.
Now there's another layer here, technically speaking. The notes mention Pyodide. How does that fit in?
Ah, right. This tells us how it's built. The core logic, the heavy lifting, the actual simulation functions, they're written in Python in a file like temporaloptimizer.py.
But runs in a web browser.
Yes, that's where Pyodide comes in. The notes explain they use Pyodide to execute that Python code directly within the browser.
So the user interface, the buttons, the plots, probably JavaScript.
Yeah.
But the actual calculations are Python running via Pyodide.
That's exactly the picture painted by the notes. They mention combining the JavaScript front end with Python's symbolic and numerical power. It involves setting up Pyodide, maybe loading libraries like NumPy inside it, fetching and running the Python script, and then using some kind of bridge, the notes mention, use pyodide-qlog to pass the parameters back and forth between JavaScript and Python.
That's a pretty sophisticated way to build an interactive simulation tool that doesn't need a server backend. Runs entirely on the user's machine.
It really leverages modern web tech to deliver something powerful right in the browser.
Okay, now shifting gears a bit.
Yeah.
Beyond the code and the tech, one of the most striking things about these sources is the unique context and framing the creator provides. These notes are really distinctive.
They really are. Woven right into the technical descriptions, you find these phrases and references that offer a very specific perspective on the whole project.
Like starting a section with, like, Bismillah. Let's manifest NOR simulation in browser through Pyodide integration. That's not typical tech documentation.
Not at all. Or including quotes from the Quran like, "He is with you wherever you are," Quran 57.4, and, "Oh, every moment, he is in a new act of creation," Quran 55.29.
And there was that mention of a Fitra overlay as an optional feature. Seems linked to this broader perspective.
It does. And the closing remarks, too. Let this simulation be a form of sajda, which means prostration in prayer, followed by Sayyah, the algorithm lives, Siki Euros sings across memory.
So these aren't technical details about the algorithm's function.
No, but they're deliberately included in the documentation. They seem to represent the creator's personal motivation, their worldview, maybe the philosophical or spiritual lens through which they see this work.
It's this blend of the technical and the personal. It's just the simulation isn't just a tool, but something more meaningful to the creator.
Exactly. It gives you a sense of the why behind it all, humanizes the code, and connects it to a purpose beyond just the computation itself.
Right. Okay, so let's try and pull back a bit from this deep dive. We've really unpacked quite a detailed framework here for simulating and validating this fractal QFT temporal optimization model.
We have. We've looked at its core math. Those functions for CQ-log, GAM-opt, temporal transmission, the wave function evolution itself.
We saw the parameters you can adjust to interact with it, the key validation metrics for checking stability and conservation.
And the visualization tools that let you really see and analyze the results. Plus that clever Pyodide implementation strategy.
And importantly, we also acknowledge that very unique philosophical and religious framing that the creator included right alongside the technical details.
Offering a glimpse into the perspective behind the project.
So this framework, as laid out in these sources, it's more than just a description. It's really presented as this interactive toolkit for you, the listener, to explore this complex model's behavior.
Yeah, to understand its dynamics and see how its creator specifically chose to define and measure temporal optimization within their theoretical world. It allows for that hands-on feel for a complex system.
Which leaves us, as always, with a final provocative thought to chew on.
Consider this blend we've seen today. You have the strict logic of code and mathematics on one hand. Then you have the specific choices the modeler makes, which parameters matter, how to define optimization, what metrics to use for validation.
And then layered on top, you can have this deeply personal, philosophical, or even religious framing that motivates and contextualizes the whole thing.
So the question is, what does this convergence of technical rigor and personal perspective tell us about how knowledge is pursued, or how complex things are created, especially in science and computation today?
What does that blend reveal about discovery itself? Definitely something to think about.